I really appreciate y'all's time because I know it's very valuable to be here and you want to get as much as you can out of it. So I appreciate you taking your time. As he said, I'm a custom home builder and designer in Virginia, avid 3D modeler, SketchUp junkie like all you guys, and estimator, engineer, carpenter, musician on the weekends rolled up into one. And for years I've had a passion for building really highly detailed 3D models of every house that I build before it's built, because I wanted to show my clients and my trades and my team exactly what I wanted the end product to look like and what the scope of work was. So I found myself coming up with some pretty cool, finding I probably bought every rendering program out there and every animation program out there. That's why I'm broke. And just trying to find the best ones out there. And I've got quite a few of them, and I can, show you guys some stuff that I've learned through trial and error. But I got obsessed with then getting quantities out of it. And like Tyson said, I had a lot of conversation with the guys at SketchUp. I'm like, I see this pretty roof. Well, how many squares of shingles are on it? So I kind of turned that obsession into scouring the globe for extensions that I could pull the information out of the model. And I really just couldn't find one. And so I was doing some presentations at AIA last year for SketchUp. And when I left, I realized, I'm just this little fish in Virginia, but I don't think anybody else is going to do it. So I hired a developer. I designed what I wanted it to do and hired a developer to do the geeky code stuff and make it come to life. So that is estimated for SketchUp, and I'll be showing you guys some of that today. What I'm going to do today, first of all, I've got a sample model that you're going to see. Didn't get it in time to get on the USB drive or the stick, but if you go to my Facebook page, it's Estimator for SU, either that or Twitter. I posted this morning this model file. It's kind of big. I probably go opposite of, like Nick Saunders, total rock star. I think he's amazing. He likes to break his models up into individual models, and I have everything in one model. So I probably get yelled at a lot for that, but for Estimator, I want everything to live in that one file. So it's a big model, but it's full of tons of components and stuff that I've gotten over the years, most of it off the warehouse, the 3D warehouse. And but it's also completely estimated. So everything in the model has pricing associated with it. And so I've got a booth here. If anybody's interested in any kind of takeoff stuff, it's there. But what we're going to be doing is taking this model and dissecting it from start to finish. And it's the method that I use to go from sort of the boring 2D stuff and get down to where I've got something I can show my clients. That's the same house model. This is a lake cottage that I created just for this to have a sample file because I needed something smaller. Most of my homes are pretty good size. But everything is modeled, everything is estimated, siding, stone, gutters, downspouts, the columns you see, the asphalt, the mulch beds, even that dock that's coming around the corner is a component in there. The patio, the decks. You go inside, there's down to the outlets and switches in the house. So it's pretty thorough, but it is a large file. And I also realize that it's probably farther than most of you would want to take, and it may be kind of crazy, but it's there. It works for me. Some of the basics before we go into it, I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite extensions. And if you were in boot camp, I was in boot camp, and I learned a lot. You probably saw and heard of a lot of good extensions and maybe got some on your stick of knowledge. But you'll be hearing me talk about some of my favorite plugins, and some of those guys are here that are the developers. When I got into doing this development stuff, I realized how brilliant some of the guys in this community are. So we'll be talking about some of those plugins, extensions, keyboard shortcuts. How many of you guys use keyboard shortcuts? Most of you probably. There's some favorites that I use all the time, like hiding rest of model, so I can get rid of all the stuff around because I do a lot of groups, and if you're not doing groups and components, you should be. Paste in place, hide geometry, that kind of stuff. Another thing is collaborations. As a home builder, I collaborate a lot with other trades so that I don't have to do it all. My surveyor will do my topo analysis. He'll go out and shoot the grades, and he'll provide me with my contour lines that I'll use all the SketchUp tools and some plugins to create my site models. So I get him to do that for me. I use that over the geolocation because it's the accurate site. I live in a lake community, and sometimes it's way off in the topos. My truss manufacturers, most of the houses I do have floor and or roof trusses or both. And so they'll do the engineering, and then they'll give me a 3D DXF file, and I'll bring it into SketchUp in a clean file. I always bring things into a clean file because if you bring something from the warehouse or you bring in a DWG, it might have a whole bunch of layers that it's just going to clutter your file. And so I'll use Cleanup, which is TomTom's plugin. TomTom's running around here somewhere. Brilliant guy, tons of plugins of his that I use. And I'll use Cleanup just to get rid of any odd stuff in there. Cabinet vendors, most of my cabinet people use 2020 or something like that. I don't usually model my own kitchens because I want it to be exactly what the client's going to see. Okay, just like the trusses. I don't want to make up a truss and stick it in there, because if I did it differently, then the carpenters are going to, well, that truss isn't here, or something to that effect. So I want it to be the actual thing that's going in there. And probably 10% of the time, if I get a set of floor trusses and I model that and I stick it in my model and I snap it right to my plate, I'll find a mistake, probably 10% of the time. A dimensional thing. Maybe it's 2 inches too long over here, or there's a problem over here. And I can fix it now instead of that expensive time later. My HVAC contractors, I work with them. My guy recently has gotten into having fun playing with SketchUp, and he likes to do the ductwork in there. But I like to plan out where my return air registers are going to be and things like that that seem to get thought of as an afterthought after you're framed. So I work with them on that. And then finally, my carpenters. My carpenter has a laptop with SketchUp Make on it, and when we start a new job, I'll stick just the framing model on there for him. And he actually will study it, and I spend a lot of time doing framing details, but I guarantee you that the time that I spend doing that is time I'm not spending out in the field holding their hands. Just a little background story on Estimator. I'm not going to be up here being Mr. Salesperson, but just you're going to hear me talking about some referring to it as we go. Does anybody here need to get takeoff data at all? Anybody interested in any kind of estimating? Good. Estimator, there's 3 fundamentals. It had to be 100% inside of SketchUp. I did not want to have to leave SketchUp. I wanted everything to be able to be estimated inside of SketchUp. Other programs that I've tried, you'd have to export them to Excel or something, and then you finish it up, make changes. Then the client makes a change. Let's bump that wall out 4 feet, or change that brick to stone, or something like that. And then you're kind of back to square one. Did you make the change in the spreadsheet? So I wanted it to be 100% inside of SketchUp. And second was that I wanted it to be real time. I wanted it to react to whatever was selected in the SketchUp window, so I could run a report on that. If I wanted to see all the framing in my model, and I could choose Selection Toys and choose everything that's on that layer. Selection Toys is a plugin by TomTom that I use a lot. And then I can do my purchase order for my framing off of that. So I wanted everything to be real-time reported. And finally, I wanted it to be simple and customizable. I didn't want to have to write an if-then statement to figure out how many studs I needed in the house or plates. It's simple multiplication, simple math as I do as a builder every day. If somebody says, how many block will it take to do that wall over there? I use my simple math that I've done for 30 years. All right. So the way it's done, there's 5 tabs to the user interface. There's components. Components can be a stud, a dishwasher, a wheel, a bolt, anything that's your components. But it can be nested components as well. So for instance, if I have a Trex composite railing on a deck and it's got a post, and that post has a cap, a sleeve, and a skirt. There's 3 parts to that. But it's one component in my SketchUp model that is nested with those 3 components inside it. And I can assign a price to each one of those because I buy them separately anyways. But further, I can add associated costs. You hit that little plus button in the upper right, and I can add an associated cost, like the bracket that sleeve slides over. I don't want to model that, but I can add that as an associated cost, and you can add as many as you want. So that was the first thing I had to tackle that had to happen. Second one was layers. Every bit of geometry that we model has attributes of length, area, volume, and we use those attributes to do quantity takeoffs. So the way I do it on layers is I have a default, my template has default layers that I use every job. And so when price is associated with that, the next time I do that in a new model, I've already got my pricing. And I didn't mention, but components, if you save a component, you've added your cost data to it, it's saved with that component. and you can update it later on or at any time. So with layers, a case in point might be a slab. Every house I do is on a basement, and they all have a basement slab. So I've got a layer that's called basement slab. And so that simple action of drawing around the perimeter of it, making it a face, pulling it up 4 inches, triple clicking on it, making it a group, put it on that layer called basement slab, I instantly could run a report and see, you know, my cubic yards of concrete, how much my labor is, how many rolls of poly are going underneath it, because I have a simple multiplier, divide by 1,600 for a 16 by 100 foot roll of poly based on the square footage. So that way I can sort of reuse that information. Materials, it works on, think of it as an area tool. If I apply a shingle texture to my roof, I instantly have all my pricing associated with it. So it's really kind of a byproduct as you're going, and it's information. Maybe you don't need that information, but it could be extremely helpful to whoever you're working for or somebody down the line. I know I use it all the time if I've got a 2,023 square foot slab, and my concrete guy comes to me and goes, 2,100 square feet. No, it's 2023. You know, you're controlling the costs, and it works across the board that way. At least it's worked that way with me. Gives some legitimacy to it. So that's materials. Quotes is how I handle intangible things, like framing labor, or general conditions like insurance, or portable toilets, or dumpsters. Things that you're not going to model, but you need to incorporate into the total price. And then reports is actually reporting it. And it's an HTML report, which is instantaneous. You click on it. It's a branded report. You've got your company logo that you can bring in there. All the job information is in your project information. And you can save it as a PDF, or you can print it as print it out, or you can export it as a CSV file. And one of the cool things you can do, in a lot of layout users here, that you can actually copy and paste from Excel into layout, which was really cool. I didn't know I could do that until about a year ago. And so now what I can do is I can take, if I have a 3D vignette of like all my roof framing, for instance, this is what it's going to look like, guys, and then I can copy and paste the materials list in there. And it's real simple and easy to do. So that's sort of a background. Well, finally at the bottom, you can checkbox to include your quotes and a checkbox to include your margin, and then you've got your total final estimate if you're a builder wanting to use it for something like that, or anybody wanting to use it for something like that. So who does what? How many architects do we have? How about builders? Cool. How about interior designers? Landscape architects? Awesome, pretty good mix. Any others? Wow, cool. All right, well, basically, it can work in all those different fields that we've been talking about. It's not just for builders or not just for construction. I got people in the aluminum extrusion industry that have purchased the plugin. So it can work for anything. So it's not a modeling program. A lot of people saw my booth out there and they see this model out there and they think, oh my God, it's, you know, can it do all that framing? No, you're doing that. I'm just allowing you to assign your prices to that. Okay, so we'll jump into it. The first thing I do is I bring in my floor plans. If it's, you know, I get PDFs a lot as a builder. I get people sending me, hey, you know, need an estimate to build this house. I'm also a designer too, and if I'm designing it, I'm either going to be designing in SketchUp or I use SoftPlan, which is a parametric program. I still use it, but I like SketchUp because I'm getting all the detail that I want. But I might design in that program, and then I'll bring it over as a DWG. But how many people have tried to get a PDF into SketchUp? All right, so I love the PDFs, but I want to get it into SketchUp. And in SketchUp Pro, you can import a DWG or DXF. So there's a free program that I use called Inkscape, I-N-K-S-C-A-P-E. It's a program I downloaded off the internet. And you can actually, all I do is I'll open up the PDF, save it as a DXF, and close it. Then I'll bring it into, again, a clean file in SketchUp and use cleanup on it, make sure I get rid of all of the layers that are in there that I don't need, erasing the geometry that I don't need, and then I'll put all that in a group, all of it on layer 0. I always work in layer 0, just don't toggle down to one of the radio buttons to work in a different layer, because you'll regret it. You'll think, I'm smart, I'm doing all this because I'm working in this layer. You get a phone call and you come back and you're still doing that, and then everything's on a wrong layer. You can't find it or whatever. So I put all that on layer 0, and I usually, in my folder and the structure that I have, I'll usually save that as lower level floor plan. The next one, main level floor plan, upper level floor plan. But then I'll start with my template file, and I'll bring in the lowest level floor plan that you see. That's the foundation plan. Then I'll bring in the next floor, the main floor, and I'll stack them and overlay it to make sure that I'll put a known point to known corner. Excuse me, I'll go around the entire house to make sure that it's aligning. And sometimes it doesn't, but for the most part, they tend to line up. Then I'll do the second floor and bring it in, and then I'll separate them out by 10 feet just as an arbitrary distance to start with. Later on, we're going to be moving it, putting it right on the floor that we're going to be working on. So after I've done that, I'll do the foundation. I use a plugin called Profile Builder 2. Is anybody using that? That's it? Dale Martins is here. He's got his booth here. It's an awesome plugin. It's like the Follow Me tool on steroids. Profiles can be lumber, it could be baseboard, it could be crown molding, it could be anything. Any piece of geometry, any profile, it could be a DWG of a crown molding that you've downloaded, and then you can use that as a profile, and then you just start tracing it around the room as you need it. And then lately, he came out with his latest version has assemblies. So assemblies are giving you the ability to combine profiles and components and put them into a wall assembly. Like you can see that foundation wall that's right there, that's got a 10 by 20 footing, that was a profile. I've got 2 runs of rebar in there. And yes, you don't have to do that, but I did it. Then there's a foundation wall, 10 inch by 9 foot foundation wall that's centered on that. I've got expansion joint going around the inside. I've got drain tile on the outside. I've got gravel going around that. I've got waterproofing going around that I later fit to the grade, which we'll talk about. I've got anchor bolts that are within a foot from the end and every 6 feet after per code. And that's just a component that it puts in there for me. So what you're seeing in the back in the walkout is a stem wall. So you're seeing some foam insulation there, but that's a stem wall in the back. So that's just 2 sections of geometry that were created pretty quickly because I'm literally just tracing over top of the floor plan. Now I'm going to be spending most of this time with an overview versus demo. I've got these things open and I can stop and show you. I just want to make sure we cover everything versus getting bogged down into doing drawing. So it's more of an overview right now, but I certainly will stop and show you guys some things. But that simple action of creating that foundation wall and that little stem wall, I had my foundation done in a matter of minutes. But I also had all of my materials list in here as a byproduct through Estimator. So I get my foundation in. Now I've got my foundation in, I'm ready to put my slab in. So I will literally trace on top, right at that expansion joint that I have in there. If it's just a foundation, just trace along it. So I'll just use my line tool. Now in this case, this is a pretty boxy, simple house. And I probably ended up doing a rectangle from corner to corner, and then another rectangle, and then deleting the lines in between there so it's one face. But you can also just take your line tool, trace around the perimeter, close it, it makes a face. When I have that face, I use push-pull. I'll pull it up 4 inches. I'll triple-click on it so it selects all the faces and edges. And at that point, I usually assign the texture because I'm anal about that. I don't want to see a bunch of whites. I want to see what it's going to look like. So I'll just paint it with a concrete texture, whatever concrete texture you want. Then I assign it to that layer. In my case, it's FOO_basement slab in my layering system. Once I've done that, I instantly have all the costs associated with it that you see at the bottom. But I also have, of course, the visual. So then I'll take the floor plan, that lowest level floor plan, that's on its own layer. The other ones are off because I cut off their layers. Because you know in SketchUp, layers control visibility, right? And I have a bunch of layers, and we're going to be talking more about that. So I'll take that floor plan, and I'll stick it right on top of the slab, just like I'm chalking the walls. Okay? Next is going to be the framing. And this is where I use a method that I'm just going to call it lineal groups. All the random 2x4s that you're seeing in there, 2x6, the headers are 2x10s, all that was done using Profile Builder because Estimator will read that lineal footage. I don't care how many lineal feet of 2x4s I have in the house. I don't care how many 18¼ inch cripple studs I have. I just want to total all that up and divide it by 16 because I'm ordering 16-foot plate material. So I want to be able to get the data out of that. I want to see it, but I want to get the data out of it. So a lot of this becomes a disciplined method because to get the results that I need to get, I have to be disciplined about modeling it. So I'll do that in a sense where, and I will do a little quick, let me do just a little quick thing to bring up another model here. This is sort of a clean version of that. And this is Profile Builder over here, and this is the assembler. So let's say that I've got that foundation, since it's open here, it's not fitting because of the screen resolution. Let me see if I can scroll down. Here's a little button that starts drawing this stuff. So you see that one simple action of clicking to start. You can see it being extruded as I go. And I'm just going to go around the perimeter. I'm going to stop right in here just so I'm not taking up time. That one simple action created all of that. All right? So when I'm doing my framing, I'm going to pop over here off to the side. This one's ready to frame, okay? And I'm using a treated plate on the bottom, so I've got a little library over here. He gives you a whole bunch of profiles that comes with it, but I created my own library for everything I use, from lumber to interior trim to exterior trim to footings and foundations. So I've got this 2x4_PT as my treated lumber. So I'm just going to start drawing on top of it, and my laptop is seizing up on me for some reason. So the assemblies are one thing, the profiles are another, and there's two separate menus in there. But in theory, if this thing ever wakes up, I draw the bottom plates first, starting and stopping at doors. All right, then let's go ahead and do one. So I'll be flying around here with a 3D mouse, so if you see it kind of going smooth. Everybody have a 3D mouse? Anybody? If you don't, get one. I won't work without it. I refuse. All right, so I'm going to just go and start and stop at my doorways. And you can see I got my anchor bolts in there, and I got my treated plate. It's just that easy. I'll start off on the other side, skipping where that window is. I got a door that I just skipped past. So I'm going to then group these two by holding down Control and clicking on the two of those. Then I'm going to right-click on that and make it a group. The reason I'm doing that is because I got a whole bunch of these different lineal footage items. All right, and I want them on their own layer because the estimator is reading that off of that individual layer. So if you're not worried about estimating, just throw it on one layer, control its visibility, main floor framing or lower floor framing. By putting it in a group, all those layers are read individually by estimator, but I've got them all grouped into my lower level framing. So when I've done that, I'm going to double click on that group. If you double click, it edits it. So if hiding rest of model, I use Shift-H. See how I can now see it close up? I don't have to worry about all the other stuff that may be behind it. This one isn't a bad example of it, but a lot of times you really need to do that so you can see where you're working. Then I'll just switch over to my 2x4s, my regular 2x4 SPFs, and I'm just going to draw that right over top. And having laptop issues. So in theory, I'm going to draw that plate over top, over to the other side, and I put it right on top of this plate that's here now. I'm going to close out of that group for a second. I've got a stud. Now this stud is a component that I have in my library because it's already got my costs associated with it. But you know, you can create a stud, just 1.5 inch by 3.5 inch rectangle for a 2x4, pull it up 104 5/8 or whatever your stud height is, triple click on it, make it a component. I like to put a little wood texture to it for realism. And then I'm just going to move this stud over into this mix. Obviously I didn't get that plate exactly right. I'm going to double click on that group now because I'm editing the group that I just made. So I can select that plate, and I'm going to move it right on top of the top plate. While it's still highlighted, hit down Control to make a copy of that, and there's my double plates. And then I can take my studs, and I can copy them 16 inches over times 15 or however many it is, take out for windows and doors and things like that. It's not a parametric modeler. I haven't found anything out there yet. I want one. There's a thing called House Builder that's been out for a while, but it's just mass modeling. I can't make them components, so I don't use it. You could do assemblies of these studs using the Profile Builder tool that we talked about. You could actually tell studs to be every 16 inches on center and just draw from one end to the other, and it'll fill them in. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. I tend to just do these studs one at a time. I put my corners in and tees in. It doesn't take me very long to frame them once you're used to it. May sound daunting, but it's not that bad. Okay, so studs, jacks, the stringers that you're seeing, the stair stringers, those are all components, and I assign my pricing to those. And then the plates are all done in that group that we talked about so that I can get my cost for that. So I'll go through and do all my framing on this lower level that you're seeing in here. Then, and I've got all my materials off of that as well. The main floor system in this case is TJIs. Most of the times I'm using floor trusses. For this simple small model, I use TJIs. TJIs are truss joists. You know, you got a top chord and a bottom chord and a web stiffener. And you can model those in SketchUp, just simply model your own and push-pull them, or you can use Profile Builder and do the top, bottom profiles in the web profile and draw them. So the perimeter was done with a rim board. That's an actual TJI rim board that's going to be going around the perimeter. And then the joists that I'm putting in here, I put them in, I'll actually measure them, and then I'll name them by their length, and then copy them. So the reason I'll measure them, because if it's 14'6", I need to order 16-foot material. If I just give my lumber yard total lineal footage, I don't know what I'm going to get. So I order it by the lengths that I'm going to need, so that when I'm done, I can see I have a report in here. I've even got hangers in there because somebody put it up on the warehouse and I'm geek enough to download it and use it. So I've got joist hangers in my model and have pricing associated with those as well. So after I'm done, I got my whole material list for my main floor. The next thing I do is my subfloor, and all I'm doing there in native tools in SketchUp is I'm taking my line tool and I'm drawing a perimeter, just like I did with that slab. I'm literally just tracing that rim joist that I had in there to create a face. But before I pull it up, I cut out for that stairwell. You see, you've got a stairwell in there. I don't need flooring in there because my stairs are going down. So I'll literally trace my stairwell and delete that face. I'll even go in where the toilets are. The toilets are in on the drawing. I'll offset from the back of that wall. It's 12.5 inches to the center of a toilet drain. I'll offset with my guide tool and tape measure tool, pull it over 12.5 inches, and then I'll do another guide coming from the side wall to the center of that toilet, and then I draw a circle. I usually do a 4-inch diameter, 2-inch radius, and trim that out. Because if it's sitting over top of a truss, I'm going to have a problem, because you cannot cut trusses. So I would rather lay that out now, and if you're an architect, lay it out so your guys aren't doing that and then having to cut trusses and get in trouble and that sort of thing. So I work my floor systems around that. So I'll do my floor system first, but then I'll go back and tweak it. And if I'm working with my truss manufacturers, I let them know of those center lines to make sure that they space them properly. So then once I've got that face, I pull it up 3/4 of an inch because I'm using 3/4 inch Advantech subflooring in my market. Triple click on it. I give it that nice wood texture, that OSB kind of texture that SketchUp has in it, and put that on my layer that's called subfloor. Then my pricing is associated with that subfloor. So in Estimator, I'm using the area of that subfloor and dividing by 32 for 4x8 sheets. I'll put a waste factor in there because with everything, you're going to have to add a waste factor. I can put sales tax and that sort of thing, and so I can calculate the number of sheets of sheathing that I need. I can use a formula that I have in there for how many buckets of screws for subfloor screws and how many tubes of subfloor glue. And that's just been over the years of studying jobs and going, okay, it's however many tubes per sheet and that sort of thing. But it's just simple formulas that you can put in there. If you don't need it, you don't need it. So that's my subfloor. Then I'll take that main floor plan and stick it right on top of the subfloor, just like I'm chalking the walls. When I go to my main floor, it's the same theory, okay? I'm using those groups, lineal groups, where I'm doing my 2x4s and 2x6s and 2x10s, all my random lumber. Studs or components like we talked about. The sheathing that you're seeing on there, the exterior sheathing, I'll pop into the model. Let's get to the correct one. Let's go into we're in the basement framing here. I'm dropping back in here. I didn't show you before that other one, but you can see my stair stringers are in there. They're components. The sheathing that I put on there, literally I just use the rectangle tool and I create a face from corner to corner. I'll draw a rectangle across it to create that face. I'll then trace the window openings and delete that face that was created. I'll trace the door opening and delete the bottom edge that was down at the bottom, and then that creates a hole in each of those cases. So then when I've got my sheathing, there's a couple different ways I'll do it. Sometimes I'll go wall by wall. You could always do all those faces and then use a plugin called Joint Push Pull. Is anybody familiar with that? Joint Push Pull is a separate plugin that you can get. It's free, like most of these things that seem to be free. And you could pick multiple faces, choose the depth that you want to pull it, and it pulls them all at the same time. So I use that on my roofs, and we'll talk about that. So I'll pull that sheathing out a 1/2 inch. And I usually will triple click on it and give it all that OSB texture like I'm using, because I use OSB sheathing, and put it on that group called sheathing. so I can control its visibility. But then I picked up this Tyvek image off the internet because I wanted to, you know, again, I wanted my clients to know what this thing is going to look like. And I use Estimator, that becomes a material. So if I clicked on that and chose the material, you get a drop down of everything that's in that selection. Tyvek, you can see that I've got all these different costs associated with it. I'm using its square footage to figure how many sheets or how many rolls of Tyvek. I'm using its square footage divided by 32 for how many sheets of sheathing. I'm using its square footage divided by 900 for how many gun nails I need. So, I mean, you can add as many of these things in there as you want to add.
Ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
So the back side of that sheathing is the OSB texture,
Yes.
which is reading the sheathing, and the front side is the Tyvek?
Well, you could take it to that level. And when I first did it, I had a wall sheathing material and the Tyvek, and that's getting a little anal. You don't have to, you can combine that. You got to make sure, I'm glad you said something, when you're doing this and using the materials part of Estimator, only apply that texture to one face. If you just triple clicked on that and applied that texture to the whole thing, you're going to double your results and then plus whatever little bits you got going around the edges. So thank you for saying that because that's a very important.
That's what's happening there, right? You
Yeah.
get the sheathing from the back
See if I fly on the inside, you can see the sheathing.
That's what it's counting?
Yeah, so if I double clicked on that to hide rest of model, see it's sheathing, it's the OSB texture everywhere except for that front face. If I wanted to be really thorough, I could have painted to the inside of that, but you're adding waste in there so you can accommodate for those sorts of things. So that's how I'm doing the framing models, and I can step through it in here. I sometimes will go just with the framing, isolate the framing materials on that level, and select everything, and then from there I'll just run a report, and that's my purchase order. Well, let me cut off my other items in here. So that's $2,000 worth of lumber in there. But I can run a report on that and make that my purchase order. So my main floor system, these are the TJIs that we talked about, and the rim joists and so forth. And again, I just measured, used a tape measure tool, measured from end to end. It's 15'5", so I'm going to order 16-foot material and trim it in place. But that's what I'm going to name it. So if I clicked on that one joist is $25. If I right-click and say Instances, Select Active, it's going to select all the ones that are in there so I can get an idea of how many of those I'm going to need. Plus, you can also see that in Entity Info over in your main tray. Okay. There's TJIs alone because I'm ordering those separately. It's my subfloor. You can see where I've got the holes cut out for the registers from the HVAC guy. Main floor framing. Main floor walls, again, done the same way. If I was to double click on one of these plates, hide rest of model, you can see all that random lumber. You can see my headers. I've even got OSB in between sandwiched in the headers, so it's little rips of OSB, and it's calculating all that too. So it's, again, whatever level you want to take it. Second floor system. The second floor system of this house is just 2x10s. So in this case, I used Profile Builder to just trace around that perimeter, and then Estimator is going to take the lineal footage divided by 16 for how many pieces I'm going to buy. But then these individual joists, I do that same sort of thing where I actually will use a tape measure tool and name it by that. So you'll see the component name up in here, the definition. That's how it's going to report out. These are some LVLs. I use the different texture to denote that. But instead of, sometimes I'll do the lineal footage thing for those for a purchase, but a lot of times I'll do them as a component so I would get the correct length ordered. Those are those joist hangers I was telling you about. So that's the second floor system there. That's isolating that floor system. There's my subfloor. You can see I've got that hole cut out for the toilet, so if I went down below and looked up inside there, I'm missing a joist. Don't want to be on top of a joist. You cut that joist, you're going to fail your inspection. Second floor walls. Second floor walls on this house were more complicated because the walls were built under the roof. So you've got all these slope ceilings everywhere. So to frame this was a bit of a time-consuming thing, but it's highly accurate. And I do these a lot because I want to study my headroom. You know, I can't tell you the plans I've gotten, and then you go to frame it, and you can't get in because nobody thought about, or maybe the knee wall didn't get built the correct height, or nobody thought about that in designing it. So that's the second floor wall. Second floor, the second floor framing pack was just isolating the second floor. Roof framing, I'm doing these rafters as components. I'll model it. Usually I just model it inside of SketchUp, but I have a library of rafters, but half the time, by the time I go find that library, I could have recreated it. So I'll start a rafter with, by the pitch, of course. I'll come in and maybe draw a line off that wall, go over 12 inches for my run and whatever my rise is, and close that and make a little triangle there. I'll offset using the parallel line. offset the depth of that rafter. And I'll generally draw just the tail of that rafter first. And then I'll mirror it using TIG's mirror tool. It's a free plugin called Mirror. It's on Sketchucation. You know, you can mirror in SketchUp. You can make a copy of it, move copy, use the scale tool, or you can also invert them. I've just gotten so used to been using Mirror for so long. I could select that rafter and then choose its midpoint somewhere along the way, and then it'll flip it to the other side. And then from there, I can make it come up and meet the ridge. If that's just the tail, I'll bring it, since it's the same component, because you edit a component, you're editing the same thing. So if I edit this one over here, you're going to see the other one kind of grayed out on the other side. And I'll just move it on up until they meet and draw a line at the point of the intersection. I'll offset 3/4 each way for my ridge board and trim it out. And then I've got my rafter. And I'll use the same idea where I take my tape measure tool and I'll measure that rafter and then name it by that length. This one's a 22-foot long rafter, and then just start mass copying them. And then everything is associated with it is into it. So when you get into these valleys like this, it gets a lot more complicated. So I'll come in and usually I'll create the plane on the roof first, because I'll have something to work to when that valley comes in. And then once I've got my valley rafters in there, I'll move that first rafter on over until it hits, but then I'll edit that. I'll make it unique first. Always remember to make, if you're making a copy of a component and you're going to change that, make sure you make it unique. So in this case, the first time I moved that 2x8 by 22 over, move copy, and then made it unique, it named it 2x8 by 22 number 1. All right? I'm usually going to be, then I'm measuring that new length, then I'm going to rename it by its appropriate length. So it's a little time consuming, and if you're mass modeling, then you don't need to do all that. But for me, I needed that information. So I'm going to actually name them so I can get all my material list. So that's all the roof framing in here. They've got ridge boards. All the subfascia and other random lumber you're seeing was done using Profile Builder, and that same concept that we were talking about. This is all this random lumber. I've got some furring strips in here, some ceiling joists. All this is grouped so that I could get all my lineal footage data, but then I can also control its visibility with a single click. All right, so that's my roof framing. Next is my roof, and what I'm doing on the roof is I'll put a skin to those rafters or a mesh, and I'll either do line tool or rectangle tool, but I'll create that face on each location, and I'll trim out where these valleys are. I may do this as one big rectangle across in here or one big face, and then do these in here and then trim those out. But either way, I'm creating those individual faces. Once I've got all those faces, I'll use joint push pull. I just select each one of those faces, choose a 1/2 inch in the joint push pull command, pulls it all up a 1/2 inch, and then in this case, I did what we were talking about with the sheathing. The underside, I've got the OSB, or a roof sheathing layer, so if I opened up my materials, I've got this roof sheathing, and there's where I'm getting my quantities from that, and I've got the Asphalt 18, which is the name of this shingle here. Okay. So that's how I'm getting my quantities. But that's the material that I'll use as a default for my models. So let's say you've got somebody that wants to see the price difference between a metal roof and a shingled roof. So if in my library I've got a metal roof texture, regardless of what color they want later, okay, it's a standard material that I'll use. And I could paint it with the metal texture or just use material replacer. If I've got that other material, I can replace the asphalt shingle material with that metal roof and instantly see the price difference. So when somebody's wanting to know the value between the two or the cost comparison between the two, I can do it really quickly while they're sitting there in my office. So the ridges that you're seeing in here, I did the same sort of thing. I used a joint push-pull, and I pulled it up, in this case, about 3/8, just to give it that realism. You don't have to do that if you're just looking at a general roof. This is just, we're down to the details, so I'm just showing you the little anal things that I do in here. And then I'll just change that texture orientation to do that. Now, to get information from that, I've got another little plugin that comes with Estimator called Takeoff Length, and it lets you do collections of lengths of things. It could be walls, it could be ridges, it could be valleys, it could be starter courses, it could be hips. You got these little collections, and you can literally just hover over an edge in your model. It'll change color, click on it, and it just accumulates those lengths. That may be all you need. You may not want to run an estimate on it, but you want to know how many lineal feet of exterior walls I have, or how many exterior lineal footage of footings I have. So you could use that quick little tool to create those little collections. And that's, again, available on the website, too. It's free with Estimator. All right, so when I've got my roof on, I'm going to go back into our presentation here. So we talked about the second level framing. Decks are done sort of the same sort of way. The joists are components. I may do the outer band using Profile Builder just to get the outline of it and get my links. But my joists, and I'll just use the green pressure-treated material that comes with SketchUp. And I've got joist hangers in there, not only for realism, but for my quantities, for my order. The columns that you're seeing down there are some columns that I use a lot. They're structural 10 by 10 columns that I've used from job to job. It's a component. It's already got the pricing associated with it. And then when I move it into a new model, I just adjust. I'll make it unique and adjust the height as I need it. Roof framing, we talked about briefly in there. Roofing, I talked about how I did that. Any questions on the roofing? I know I'm flying through some of this stuff. Yes, sir. To make it unique? No, you can just right-click on a component. So if I came on this joist right here, let's say I took this joist that's in this deck here. All right, that is a 2 by 10 by 12 joist. So I'm going to say move, hold down Control, and move it out of here. Okay, so if I was to, excuse me, get a little flight happy. If I just jumped in there and started pulling that, see how they all pull? I don't want to do that. So I'm going to undo that. But if I go through and say, click on that component, right-click on it, make unique. Then when I click on it, it changes just this one. So I'll move this to the next location. Let's say that the deck resets back in 2 feet or something like that. I'll copy it over, push it back to fit, and then come in and rename it. So now in this case, you see how it was named? If I click on it, it named it number 1. So I'll come in there. If it's a 10-footer now, I'll just override that. But it has to be a unique name. You can't have a component with the same name and change it. It has to be a unique name, and you'll get yelled at for that too, because it happens to me a lot. Yes, sir?
Since you've used the texture, the wood texture on this,
Yeah.
Do you have that like set as 0 so it doesn't have a conflict between the component price and the texture price?
Yeah, I just don't assign prices to the texture. So you can do one or the other or both if you wanted to. But yeah, I don't do textures to something like that because I might use that texture elsewhere, and then all of a sudden I'm going to have pricing showing up for something that doesn't exist. Yes, sir?
You are using that.
It does that for you. Yeah, if you did joint push pull, if you looked at it, it's going to go right up to that peak. It will do some weird stuff every now and then. So I'm a little leery of it sometimes. Sometimes it works great. Sometimes it'll give you a face that you can no longer, it'll smooth it. And some of the SketchUp guys could probably educate me on that, but I've had problems with that before. Yes? Right. Yeah. Good question. They're unique components of that 2 by 10. But I'll name them individually so that it'll be a unique name, but then over in Estimator, you have to add a description. And the reason I make you add the description is because just for what you said, you may have some that are 15.2, over here they're 15.8, over here they're 14.9. They're all going to be cut out of 16-footers. In Estimator, when you're assigning the description to it, the component name is whatever it is. But when you put that name in there, it's 2 by 8 by 16 or 2 by 10 by 16. And as long as you name it the same and price it the same, it's going to report out and total those for you. But in SketchUp, it's a unique component and unique component name. Any other questions at this point? Cool. All right, so back in the presentation. Now let's jump into the site. We'll change topic for a minute. This is what a standard kind of site looks like from my surveyor. In this case, I had those 3 lots, so I did the whole cul-de-sac in this one. But usually it's just the lot. Okay, so what I'm going to see in most of my files, he's going to send me a DXF file. Half the time he doesn't know what he's sending me, but I see these contour lines floating up in space. And those contour lines that you're seeing up there are on 2-foot intervals, every 2 feet up. Okay, and in my case, my elevation, we're at 800 feet. The lake elevation, full pond is 795. Property lines are at 800 feet. So that's why they're floating up so high out of the ground. So what I do down in the bottom in this 2D information that I have, I put all that on a layer called 2D site so I can cut that off and on and get it out of my way. You'll see the road, I actually made a face towards the lot because I didn't need the whole development. You could do the whole development if you wanted to. But I create a face, I'll make that a group first of all, so I don't stick to anything. It's very, very important to make groups, because otherwise, if you start going and monkeying around and drawing a rectangle over top of something and you go pull it up and all of a sudden you see all these other things coming up with it, it's because it's sticking to it. So make it a group and it's unique, and you can draw on top of it without affecting it. So you'll notice that the house was placed. There's a little outline of the house. And then on top of that in 2D, while it's easy to draw in flat 2D, I just traced a driveway. It's not the prettiest driveway in the world, but it's for an example. There's a driveway there. There's a path that goes down to the dock. Later on, you'll see how I do mulch beds and things like that around the house, and then how we drape it onto the property. But for starters, this is what I'm typically going to see. Oh, what is that?
What are your boxes?
Those boxes that you see going around there, those are the drain fields for those lots. I have septic systems in this neighborhood. So yeah, you probably are not used to seeing those. But that's just the 2D property. I'll create a face for the road, a face for the driveway, a face for that pathway. And then in SketchUp, we're going to be talking about this later, but in the sandbox tools, you can take that face and raise it above your property and drape it right down. And it's really, really cool. I'll show you that. So this is what it looks like when I first get it. So what I actually do is, if any of y'all took Nick's course, he does separate models. So he'll have a site model and the house model, and he uses the house model as a reference. It's something he doesn't edit it in there, and he fits the house to the property. Okay, I go the other way around, is I fit the property to the house, because I don't want to monkey around with my red and green axes. If you go to change something and you're on some weird angle, it just I stay away from it. So I'll rotate the house to fit. And back in that previous slide, something I didn't point out is you can see the north arrow over there on the side. You can use, and SketchUp guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but I use a plugin called Solar North, and then I'll actually set that to be north, because I do sun studies for my clients. And the Solar North plugin, it seems to work on this one, because when I did it, the sun comes exactly in the way that I thought it would. Okay? So I don't worry about north when it comes to my properties, because I can correct that. So I'll take the 2D footprint of that house that we had, and I'm actually going to fit it. I'll take a known corner, and I'll snap it right to the corner of the house, and then rotate. So that whole site that we saw before, I'll take the contours, and I'll take the site, and group all of that, so that when I move the site to the house and do all my rotation, everything associated with that is moving. If I did just the bottom part and didn't do my contours, then I'm screwed. I'd have to go back and start over again with it. So I'll get the house placed where I want it. All right, then you can see those contour lines. Those contours I put on a separate layer called existing contours. Because for me, my goal is I want to do the existing site, and I'm going to do the proposed site. And then I'm going to compare the volume of the two of those. It's an arbitrary volume, but I need to know, am I hauling dirt in, am I hauling dirt away? There's a plugin that TIG has called Cut and Fill. Cut and Fill. And it's really cool if you get into doing site mining, you landscape architects. You can have two sites, as long as they started out the same and you're altering the two, it'll compare the two and give you the cut and fill ratio. But you can also just use the entity info and use the volume, which is what I'm doing in here. So what you're seeing, this was done using a plugin called Topo Shaper. Topo Shaper is a free plugin. I don't know if it's on the Extension Warehouse. I know it's on Sketchucation, I think. Somebody can help me with that. But Topo Shaper, you can use the sandbox tools. Let me drop back a second. You could have selected those contour lines and use the sandbox tools that comes with SketchUp, and then just say from contours, and it'll spit that mesh out there for you, or a contour for you. With Topo Shaper, it's a more simplified mesh to work with, and it also puts that skirt that you see around there, that brown skirt, all right? But it's not a solid. So at that point, if I was to flip that thing over, you'd see it has no bottom to it. So I usually end up exploding that so it's all that loose geometry, and then I'll trace a line somewhere along the bottom to make it close up and have a face at the bottom. Then it's a volume. Then it's got if you look at entity info and you don't see a volume reported in cubic feet, it's not a solid. And you're going to run into this a lot. If you're ever wondering why doesn't it report a volume, I see everything that looks closed. There can be one errant piece of geometry somewhere. I don't care if it's a needle in a haystack, because sometimes it is. When I do these things, there might be some little teeny line that got drawn somewhere, and I couldn't see it. It's a needle in a haystack. There's a couple of different plugins. Tom, the genius who's here, created Solid Inspector. He's got Solid Inspector 1, then he came out with Solid Inspector 2. Solid Inspector 2 sort of automatically fixes some things. I still use Solid Inspector 1 because sometimes I need it. It helps in certain applications. But what it will do is if there was a teeny little line in that group, it could be just a line inside that I'd never be able to see. When you click Solid Inspector over top of that solid, and it's not a solid, this red bullseye is going to be right over top of what your problem is. But sometimes it'll automatically fix it. Solid Inspector 2 will automatically fix it. So I did that, and I've got this volume. And again, this is just an arbitrary volume. And I'll show you why I'm needing that in the next slide. All right, so then I'm going to choose my elevation. If I'm lucky enough for the architect or the engineers to give me my slab elevation, that would be awesome. But most of the time, it falls on me, and that's a permanent decision I'm making. So I do these contour plans, these site models on every house I do, because it's going to tell me if I need a sub-foundation, it's going to tell me if I need to haul in dirt. I get a really, really accurate concrete estimates instead of surprising my client with a change order because, oh, that sub-foundation was $10,000, I'm sorry. You know. So I'll actually move that group that we saw, that I put that skin to, and I've got that mesh on that site, and I'm going to move it until it gets into the house. I've not done anything to the house. That foundation is right where it was when we started. So what I did is I sort of picked a happy medium in there. And you can see it's almost right on grade. It's not quite fitting contour perfectly, but there's a little bit of cut on that little right side there, and it's almost dead on the left side. The patio is sort of sticking up out of the ground a little bit, so I'm going to have some fill there. On the front, it's kind of a steepish slope coming down, so I want positive drainage. So I've just found that little happy medium, okay? So now that I've got it placed, I got a bunch of dirt in the way. I've got to excavate, just like I would building a house. So what I do is I cut on hidden geometry. I've got a shortcut for that, but it's also just under, view, hidden geometry. And you'll see all those triangles. That's the mesh of that surface. All right, it's important that we can see all those individual faces, because if we didn't do hidden geometry, that's just one big smooth contour, and we can't edit that. So we'll cut on hidden geometry. Then I'm sort of looking down on it in this slide over here. I cut away all the geometry, erase all the geometry under and around the house as far as I need to be able to backfill to.
Hide it or
Delete it. Delete those faces. What you're seeing, that blue that you're seeing on the underside there, that's the skirt that we saw, the reversed face of that. That's why you're seeing the blue. Now, I learned something in boot camp from Daniel Tall. When he does that, he uses a plugin which I already have. I just didn't think to use it for that. It's called Tools on Surface. Anybody heard of Tools on Surface? It's a great little plugin. When you're working on site models, you landscape people, get it. It's free. But what he does is just kind of traces a circle around that by when you're drawing a line. If you started drawing a line on a surface like that, it's going to want to go out on a proper axis. Tools on Surface will actually draw that line right on top of whatever surface you're working on. I don't know how they do it, but it's brilliant. The way I did it here was I just erased all those triangles around there. It just took me a little bit longer, but it did the same trick. So now that I've erased that, I certainly don't have a solid anymore because I have a big gaping hole in the ground, and the house is just sort of floating there. But what I want to do is get my final grade so I can show everybody what this thing's going to look like with the final grade. So the way I do that, I'm going to look at it from the side, is I start drawing a line around the perimeter where I want the grade to be, where my backfill is going to be. And a little trick I do is I'll draw the first two lines and then select those two lines and make them a group. Then I'll edit that group and continue drawing lines around the perimeter. The reason I'm doing that is because sometimes on the bigger houses, it might be 100 edges around that thing. So when I'm done with it, I can explode that group, and they're all selected for me already. So it's just a little time saver. So it gets a little tricky and time consuming, but when I've selected those new lines around the house that I want, I then have to select all these edges that border that hole. Tom taught me how to do that. I've been so many times I've had to pick a million little edges. And then you're holding down control and you pick, and then you accidentally come off of it, and you start all over again. So I was in a class the other day, and Tom was milling around, and I was like, come here, because he wrote the plug-in for some of these things. And I said, how, because he had selection toys, how can I do these edges? I can't figure it out. And of course, it's the middle of the class, and I didn't want to be disruptive. And he walks over, goes click, drags the mouse over that entire area, and then right-click, select border edges, and they all get selected. Hours of my life could have been saved. But that's why we're here, right? We're here to learn and teach and help each other. I mean, I'm here to learn too. I've learned a ton since I've been here. And I'm hoping that I'm helpful and not boring you guys to tears. Is this boring? Is it too detailed? No. Okay, thank you. All right, so now when I've done that action of selecting all those lines and then selecting all those border edges, I've got all those things selected. What I've been doing until yesterday is, now that those are all selected, in the sandbox tools, I'll use From Contours, and it will put a contour over all that for me. Daniel Tall taught us the other day about this plugin called Soap Skin Bubble. I'd never heard of it before. I've been doing this for years. And it really makes a cleaner face in many cases than the From Contours. Wish I'd known about it. But it still works. I still make it work. So when I do that From Contours, if you can see the perimeter, see how it's kind of built up now around that perimeter. I'll get to the excavation in a second there. But what it's done is it's sort of built the grade up where the border edges that you're seeing around that brown at the top, that's basically that line that I drew around the house. So when I used From Contours, it created all that over, that mesh over that, but it also created a mesh where the house is. So what I do is I'll just, when it first create that From Contours, it puts it in a group. So the first thing I do is right-click on it and explode it, because I'm editing this group. I failed to mention, I double-click to edit that big site that we were doing, okay, because it's a group. So I double-clicked on it to edit it. That's the only way I'm editing those edges. When I did the From Contours, it was a group inside of that group. So I right-click on it and explode it so that it's all one big entity now. And then I just simply take my eraser or select either way, and I'll erase the geometry or that mesh that was created inside the house. So then when that's gone, what you're seeing at the bottom is I actually went to the bottommost part of my house. And in my case, in this model, it's the underside of the sub-slab gravel, because I got a 4-inch slab, and what you didn't see in the model that I didn't show, but if you download the model, you'll see it, is I've got a 4-inch gravel slab, sub-slab, underneath the concrete slab. Not only is it a visual, but I'm getting my quantities of how much gravel I need. So what I do is I draw a plane, just a simple rectangle up to the underside of that thing, just to get started. Then I cut it all off so I can just see that plane, and I can see this rest of the site. So what I do is I'll draw a line at each one of those vertices that you can see. I'll start at a corner, and I'll just start drawing a line down, hold down the arrow key so it's going straight down along the blue axis. And I'll hold down Shift so that it's going and it's locked into that position, going down. And then I'll infer that little rectangle that I drew at the bottom of the gravel. Okay, so that it's hitting that point. I'm not worried the fact that it's not all the way around yet. I'm just inferring that point. And then I'll go to the next vertices over and draw down and infer that point, and then connect it. And I just keep going around and connecting it until I get that little skirt, if you will, or the side walls of the excavation. So it really doesn't take that long to get the final grade and displacement of the house. All right, so what we've got here is this cut and fill analysis. You've got the proposed site now at the top, and you've got that initial existing site. And I just look at entity info. I could have used TIG's tool, but I just was kind of breaking it down to show the math, basically. So you got the existing site volume, and again, that's just an arbitrary volume. It's just a chunk of earth. And then you've got the existing site volume, and compare the two. And it's a difference of 42 cubic yards that either need to be hauled off, or 42 cubic yards of dirt is maybe 3 truckloads. I could spin that out over here, dump that over there, move that over there and spread it out. But if it had been a big number, that's a red flag that says, okay, client, we're going to have to haul this dirt off somewhere. Or if I'm planning another job and I've done this model that needs dirt, there's my give and take. If it's not too far away, I'll haul it over there. So that's how I'm getting the cut and fill on it. All right, so that's the site model to start with. We'll revisit the site at the end, but that's how I'm making sure that the foundation that I modeled is correct, and that I've got, sometimes you'll get into a steep situation and you've got a sub-foundation that might be another 30 yards of concrete. I want to know that now. And there's no reason why I won't be able to know that now because of the power of doing the 3D modeling that we're doing. So we're back on the house. And I'm going to do this just like I'm building the house. I'm going to set my windows and doors. Now, you can do simple windows of just, I don't know how you guys do windows. I mean, there's a million different ways of doing windows. I use Anderson windows in my houses. And Anderson has a plug-in that they're no longer supporting for whatever reason. And I'm a certified window installer from Anderson. And I went up there and I was like, why are you guys, dropping this? There's a lot of SketchUp users that could get some use out of this. What they're doing, I think, is they're going to make a dynamic component. That's what they're telling me to pacify me anyways. So it works in 2015, so I still keep 2015 on my desktop. And so when I need Windows, I'll open up 2015 because I'm working in 2016 now. I'll open up 2015, and Anderson Studio is cool because even if you're using Pella or some other kind of window, it's an extremely realistic window. And you got all the parameters. You can choose the window color that they offer. You can choose the interior color, stained or painted. You can choose the grills, the style of grills, the jamb thickness. So I don't want to do just a box and put a translucent face to it because I'm anal. I want the whole thing to look like it's going to look. So I'm using that plug-in to get that realistic window. So I've got a whole bunch. This was a simple house. I had some CXW25s and some CW14s and all that kind of stuff, and so I just brought them all over from that extension. The arch window that you see up there, that's a AFFW 602, and used them for a long time. When you bring in an arch window from that plug-in, since arches in SketchUp are not arches, they're segments, right? You can make it 100 segments and make it look smooth. End of the day, it's a bunch of little segments. And every time I bring one of those arch windows in over, it's like junk, junk, junk. It's 3 segments. So I had to learn how to heal that or fix that. And I used the Follow Me tool to do that. I actually cut a section of the window jamb and then drew the arch that I knew it was supposed to be and then did the Follow Me tool around it to create the good-looking curve. Double-clicked on the glass that was jagged and made it look pretty. So I had to clean them up a little bit. Now I know that it does that. I'll usually take that one component out of my library, and if it was a taller one, like it's a 4 foot tall or 3 foot tall or whatever, I'll just edit that, just expand it or scale it, either one, to fit and not reinvent the wheel, because that's a pain. So I set all my windows and doors, okay, and the byproduct is I can see how much they cost. In reality, I typically get a window quote from my vendor, so I don't care about the individual prices of those windows. In this example, I wanted to throw a price to everything, so there's a price for each window. Okay? I set my windows and doors. Next thing I do is my trim. And I do my trim in that grouped profiles that we talked about, or the lineal groups. So I've got a whole variety of things going on in there. I've got 1x8 fascia. I've got some 16-inch soffit. I've got some 12-inch soffit. I've got some 5/4 by 6 freeze boards, 5/4 by 4 window trim going around, 5/4 by 4 quarter boards with 5/4 by 5 so that they're square. A band board, which is where I started. I started with a 5/4 by 10 band against that deck, so it's prettier instead of looking at a treated band. And I use that as my guide to go all the way around for my band. And then, of course, I got my columns in there. So in my model, I modeled all those using Profile Builder inside a group that we talked about. So I may do that band at first, and then select each of those, make them a group, double-click on that group, and then start modeling all the other parts inside that group. So when I close it out, I've got all the trim. The windows and doors, the window and door trim, I usually cut the windows off so I can snap right to that opening in my sheathing. So with Profile Builder, I'll start in one corner. It's kind of tricky because, which direction to go. I never can figure it out. I just start doing it. If I go one way, it works great. If I don't, do it the other way. Or change the angle, okay? But I'll literally just trace from corner to corner, and I close where I started, and it pops that perfect piece of trim on there. And then you can move copy it if you wanted to. I mean, some of these windows are the same size, like the main level that's got the single windows in there. I created one and then just said move copy over to the other. But I don't move copy them and then edit them and move them around, because with Profile Builder, when you draw something, if you drew a 10-foot 2x4 and then use push-pull on it and pull it out 10 feet, looks like a 20-foot 2x4, but it's going to report as 10 feet because you have to edit the path of that. And he gives you a tool to do that, but when you're going around doing stuff and don't want to spend all day doing it, it's kind of a pain. But he's got a tool to let you click on it, edit path, and then you extend it to where you want to be, close it, it works. So I do all my trim, exterior trim, inside that group again. If you want to see it more in an actual model, in this model, there's the exterior trim as I'm flying around. So it's all my fascia. I've got these I use actually pieces of 1x12 that I'm cutting it out of, and I trim it all to fit. There's my freeze board, my soffits. It's exactly the way I'm going to build it. All my corner boards, and the difference at the end of the day is I'm getting my quantities out of that. So after I do my trim, I do my siding. And the siding, I'm just creating a face. I'll trace inside those corner boards and up along the freeze board until I create a face. Then I'll take my rectangle tool and I'll go from corner to corner of my trim to create that new face, delete that face. Most of the times I have to cut the windows off to do that because the window is sticking out from it. You're clicking on the window instead of clicking on that face. But since the windows are on a layer, it's a simple checkbox. So I'll create the face, I'll cut the windows out, delete those faces, and then I'll use push-pull. I pull it out a 1/2 inch. You can make it whatever you want to make it. I just want to give it some depth. And then I apply my siding texture as an image file, or as a texture, to the outside face only, right? So we're not multiplying or getting double data. And one interesting thing, like if you go up in that gable, like let me pop up into one of the neat little uses of the way I'm doing this with Estimator, because if I'm with my client, everybody's into the old hardy shake look. And so up in the gables, you want the hardy shakes, and I got lap siding over here. I've got pricing associated with those two textures. So if somebody says, well, I had lap siding in there, how much is it with the shakes? I can go click, click, one other click, and I see the price. And if they go, oh my God, I didn't know it was that much more expensive. Or, yeah, that's okay, do it. So I'm getting that instant reaction. I'm meeting their expectations, which is the most important thing. I mean, there's so many things that these models help to resolve issues now. I was talking about the return air grills. If I did this one time, I had this woman that I knew was not going to be happy with this return air grill in her foyer. And so I modeled it. This is before I even started the house. I had this big old white register on the wall in her foyer because it had to be there. There was no other place to put it. So she sees that. She goes, what is that? That's your return air grill. Well, I don't want that. Well, you have to have that. It's the only place it can go. I could put it up here, but that would be right next to your kitchen. It'd look ugly. So okay, I get it. So she understood then, instead of 4 months later when I'm building the house and she's pissed off. So it's a great way to manage your expectations. Even a byproduct of modeling this house, and this is again a made-up house. I didn't build this for anybody. That front porch roof, let me show you my layers here of my gutters. So when I put gutters on, I went to put my gutters on the house right here. This is a pet peeve of mine as a builder. I've looked at this house for so long. I'm building this house. My clients have seen it. Then my gutter guys show up and they're putting downspouts wrapping around columns and doing all this other silly crap. And then it no longer looks good. Or, God, I wish I'd have thought about that in advance. So now I model the gutters. I know that sounds silly. You don't have to do that. But I'll put those downspouts exactly where I want them, not any other place. I'll take I'm a geek anyway, so I'll do a little flyby on their phone or their iPad or whatever. You can sit there and spin the house around, and I'll just send them that. I'll text them that and say, this is where the downspouts go. I don't want to drive all the way out there just to watch them put gutters up. Or to walk over there and say, put a downspout here, let's walk around the corner, I want a downspout here. They're looking at the model now, and it takes all the guesswork. If I come out there and it's not right, they're going to fix it. But just a little simple thing of cool SketchUp stuff as we're designing in 3D. We see in 3D, right? I didn't have that shingled return across the front of there. I just had a band going there to separate the two. But when I went to put my downspouts on, I was like, I don't want to put it around that column. It's a pet peeve. I can't stand to see it wrapping around a column. And I didn't want to have it coming down and on the front face of that wall. So I thought, well, I'll just do a little shingle return over and then move the downspout off to the side. It's not a lot of water going in it. So that was a simple thing, just a result of putting gutters on the house, a design thing. Okay, so that talks about our siding there. The next thing I do is I put my stone veneer on. And you can see I take it down to my waterproofing. And when I showed you before using profile, using the assembly maker, I had that waterproofing going all the way up. But once I did that excavation and I knew where my grade was, I went back and edited that waterproofing. And then I paint it with this. The waterproofing I use is they've got a green board that's an insulation board that they put on the surface. So I just use a little green texture, but I assign a price to that. So now I know how much my waterproofing is, and he doesn't even measure it anymore. He just says, how much am I billing you for? And I give him the square footage, and he can see it, so he knows it's accurate. So the stone I'm doing the same way, okay? I'm just creating a face, pulling it out. Now the stone is really a little bit thicker than that band, but just for the sake of the model, I usually will pull it out, extrude it out until it flushes out with that band. And then I go around and do that all the way around. This is a good case of using joint push-pull because I could do all those faces, select them all, pull them out the inch or inch and a half, whatever I want it to be. Then I use the texture tool to texture just that one face. Remember, I don't do the whole thing. Yes, sir?
What about flashing? Do you do flashing details?
I usually do those in a 3D vignette to show them how I want it done. I don't model it. I could. I'm stupid enough to do that, or anal enough to do that. But
for your contractors that are installing it.
Yes. I give them a 3D vignette. So I'll do in my working drawings, I've got a lot of little details that I give people. All right. Most of them, I'll go ahead and model in the actual model. But for something like flashing, now I could use that 5/4 by 10 band, and over an estimator I can say, not only do I get the length of that, use that lineal footage for how many lineal footage of flashing I need. Okay. But I don't take the time to model that. I get yelled at enough as the size of these models get pretty big. Any extra geometry and it's just unnecessary.
Profile builder, can you make that part of that
Sure.
and run the flash
Yeah,
in there?
you could do flashing. I did it with drip edge. When I first got Profile Builder, I was profile happy, man. I did profile at everything. I was doing drip edges and all that kind of stuff, and then I kind of got over it.
Customize that enough to be able to do stuff like that.
Yeah, man, it's a very, very powerful tool, and it's $50 or something like that. I don't know what it is now. Don't hold me to that. He's here demonstrating it. It's really, really cool. I mean, I use it for all my trim. I'll show you the interior trim. The trim I'm using in here is my client had picked out in this big remodel I'm doing right now in great big home theater, and he chose this Craftsman style crown molding that he wanted. So I downloaded the DWG, made it a profile, and just started tracing it around. I got the exact crown molding that he's going to see in his house. I even put the exact Sherwin-Williams color that he wanted on there. I try not to get overly done with colors because I find that I take these things too far as it is, and I'll have some woman staring at that thing, or a man, husband, whatever, going, and I'm wanting them to study the structure, and they're like, I don't know if I like that color siding. I don't care. Okay, so that's the stone veneer. This is just a close-up on the deck. This is another cool thing that Profile Builder does with assemblies, is you can make railing assemblies that are just awesome and so quick and easy to do. You just literally, if you say, okay, I want to post every 6 feet, whatever that post is, you choose that component. Whatever your top rail is, your bottom rail is, whatever your pickets are. So that's a Trex Reveal railing system. I have a Trex Transcends railing system. I have an interior one that's got a nice 60-10 oak handrail with this big box newel post and nice wrought iron balusters with boots on the bottom. And then those are components and the others are profiles. And you can sit there and just draw around all you want. Now I do it a little, because I order these in either 6 or 8 foot sections. So instead of going around the whole thing, I did on the sides. I started with the post and I told it every 6 feet or no more than 6 feet. And so you can either force it at 6 feet or you can say no more than 6 feet and it'll put it in the middle, which is good. So in that case, I drew that railing section from there to the other post, and then I just deleted the post that put it at the end. Okay, but then I go back and I'll make those posts a component, price them, and then I'll make those railing sections as individual components. Call it a 6 foot section or 8 foot section, because that's how I'm ordering it. If you're just doing visualization, just bing, 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 bing. Who cares if there's a post inside of that post, unless it's a model issue. But I try to keep it clean so that I'm pricing it properly. So then the decking, all my composite decking that I've got in there. I did the same thing I did with Profile Builder. I went around the perimeter, and since I want to hang it past that band to give it a little reveal, like 3/4 of an inch, in Profile Builder I can go in there and say, okay, start 3/4 from the bottom left corner. And then I trace around and do my band, or my decking around the perimeter. And then to do my first decking piece is I go right inside that band, or that perimeter piece, and draw my first piece of decking. And to make it realistic, I pull it a 1/4 inch off, and a 1/4 inch in, I'll push it in. I'm not worried about losing a 1/2 inch. I'll do push-pull and move it in a 1/2 inch and just get it centered right. And then I'll name it, price it, that sort of thing, and then move copy it. Actually, I don't even need to price it because I have a price per foot built into that profile. But once I create the first piece of decking, I'll move copy. And you know when you move copy something, in this case, you're going to have 20 some of them going across there. You move copy, and then you can hit times with the asterisk symbol, maybe 15. If you need more than that, times 18. You can keep on timesing or dividing until you get what you want. And then when I get to that last board where it's up against the house, I'll rip it. Okay? All right, so that's the decks. All right, mechanicals. All right, with mechanicals, again, I work with my HVAC guy. This is one I just made up. The point was I wanted to point out is I try to work out the return errors where they go. I don't spend a whole lot of time with mechanicals, more of an informational thing. Electrical, somebody in the world of the warehouse created outlets and switches that are very realistic. When I render these things, they are spot on. All I did was I did a little edge where it would snap to a stud, because I want to snap into a stud just like my electrician's going to do. And I put a 2D symbol at the bottom. And that's on a layer for my electrical plan. So when I'm doing my construction docs, I cut off the 3D outlet, and I've got my outlet symbol where it goes. If I move that or move this, it's going to move in the drawings. So I use all my outlets and switches that I do. And I do this for a count, but I also, because I give that count to my electrician, he charges me on the per count. But I also will get my 2D information out of it. Then my can lights that you're seeing in there, you've got these little weird flare things coming down. That's an IES light. That's a rendering light that I use when I render in Thea. And so that can light's got that light built into it as a part of that component. So when I pop into there, pop into Thea and do a quick rendering for a client, they're looking at a photograph of their room with a realistic looking light. So that's it for electrical. With plumbing, again, I told you about cutting a hole for the toilet. So that's really it for the mechanicals. Insulation, not only do I want to show my people what that's going to look like, I need my pricing information. So the pink insulation that you're seeing is up against furred walls. I don't usually use pink insulation. I use foam in my market. But where I'm building a 2x4 wall up against a concrete wall, I just use bats. So all I did was create a face, put that pink texture to it that's 53 cents a square foot or whatever, and I moved it back in a 1/2 inch so it wasn't flush with the studs. And then I put all that into a group. The foam insulation was done the same way. It's just got a different price associated with it and different texture. The band that you see going around there I did using Profile Builder just because it was quick. I could trace around that whole thing, and then I textured one face of it to get my quantities. The same thing up in the roof is I created that face for the underside of the rafters and pushed it up in there. But I got a 5-inch foam texture that I use for that because it's a different price. So when I'm all said and done, that's what all that insulation looks like, the whole envelope. The blue is the backside, the reversed face. Inside of that is all that color stuff you can see. But I can select all that and tell my insulator, here's how much it should cost. He doesn't have to get out there and measure everything. All right, drywall. Drywall, all I do is I'll take, if it's a rectangular room, is I'll go down on the floor from plate to plate, and I'll draw a rectangle. I'll use the F command, offset a 1/2 inch, delete that face that's created on the inside, and I'll pull that 1/2 inch strip up to within a 1/2 inch of the ceiling, triple click on it, make it a group, and I'll clean out the doors and the windows. It doesn't take long to do, but then I'll texture the back side with this material file that I use called Drywall 48, something I made because I have 48-inch boards and 54-inch boards. So I got 2 different textures that I use. If it's a 9-foot wall, I'll texture the back side with that one called 54 because it gives me 54-inch boards in my count. So in this case, I'll paint the back side that texture so I can get my quantities, but I'll paint the inside whatever color because then if the client wants to see it in pink, they can see it in pink. It's not going to affect my quantities. The ceilings, I just trace right over top of that, pull it up that 1/2 inch, and then I usually do a grid for my ceiling. I don't cut out holes for outlets and switches. I'm not that bad. But I do cut out the holes for the can lights because I just create a nice little grid, punch a hole right through it. Then I take my can light's got a little reference point, and I snap it right to that grid and hug the ceiling with it. And when it's all said and done, I've got all my drywall board count. And this really helps me too with my estimate with my vendors. Flooring for you interior people, I just trace around the perimeter just like I did with the slabs. I got my hardwood flooring, I've got my tile, and I've got my carpet. And then I can either price that either on a layer basis or on a material basis. Okay? Trim, we talked about trim. I got some door components. They're dynamic doors so I can open and shut them. Not only does that look cool, but also in a rendering, I might want the door open or shut. So I've got that ability to do that. But I've got a library of those, and then an estimator is reading the cost for that door and that lock set, so it reports out the two of those. Then I'll just get them moved up on top of the floor, because I do all my trim on top of the floor. So the baseboard that you're seeing there, the window trim, the crown molding, all that was done within that lineal group that we talked about using Profile Builder, because then I get my links. You don't have to use that. You can use the Follow Me tool, but you know, that's just what I prefer to do to save time. Cabinetry, I typically get a quote from my cabinet guys. They typically do the design, and then they send it to me, and I clean it up, and then bring it into my model. But I'll just assign the total price of that as the quote. Appliances, I got off the extension warehouse and assigned a price to them. Same for sinks, plumbing, and everything else. Bath finishes, for instance, I got that Kohler toilet off the warehouse, towel bar, toilet paper holders, faucets, sinks, all that came off the warehouse. And then I just find ones that I like, that I use in all my models, and assign pricing to it so that the next time I need one and I drag it over in the model, I don't have to go full with pricing it, unless I need to change the price. All right, the final site model. What you're seeing floating up above is the 2D work, the faces that I created down on the 2D site. So I literally drew my mulch beds. That one that you see going around the house was the mulch beds around the house. There's a pathway that goes down to the dock. In this case, it might be gravel or concrete, whatever you want to make it. And then the driveway face. So I pulled those things up above that two-dimensional final site and hit drape, okay, on the sandbox tools. And it plops those things down, it cuts that surface out and lets you actually texture it differently. So I use asphalt texture, mulch texture, and then when I click on that face, I got my mulch quantities, my sod, and my, my driveway very accurately priced. So that's really from start to finish. I know it's a lot of stuff I threw at you. If you go to my Facebook page, I just posted it this morning. There's a link to a box.com link that you can download this model. It's 90 megabytes, so it might take you a little while, but it's loaded with stuff. There's even a dock on there with a jet ski lift, and all kinds of cool stuff. But all those components that you saw are in there, so it might save you some time. And play around with Estimator. I got a booth down over in there if you want to check it out or you want to ask me more questions. Yes, sir?
Is this presentation available somewhere?
On the stick of knowledge. But I didn't do it in this guideline that you're seeing here. They're individual PDFs. I think there's 6 of them. But it's every single slide you saw here is on there. Yes, sir?
How many of these have you made, and how long would it take you to make this model?
I did this one, I did just for this event, and it took me maybe 3 or 4 days. But his, from Texas, a lot of hours more than I said it was going to be. So it really depends. My typical house, there's a pretty good sized house on a lake that I built on, but I'm interacting with clients. Like I'll literally do an electrical walkthrough with my clients virtually instead of, normally they come to the job and we walk around for 3 or 4 hours and, they're driving in from some other place. I do it online with Join.me or go to meeting.
So you've done this a lot?
I probably have done, to this level of detail, I've probably done 12 or 15. Several of them a year, if not more, and starting to do from visualization for other people. That's really what I want to start doing is be a back office to architects and other people anywhere, because then I could work for anybody for anywhere. And I'm 51 years old, getting ready to be a grandfather, so, I'm ready to do something different. Thank you very much, folks.